Okay, we'll start with this. Yesterday in Europe, former undisputed super middleweight champion Savannah Marshall made her mixed martial arts debut under the PFL banner, finishing her opponent by knockout in the first round. Got off to a rocky start. As, you know, when boxers get into the cage, their opponent's first instinct is to take them to the ground as to take away their best weapons, their hands. But Savannah eventually got out of the hold, rose to her feet, landed a hard right hand, and had her opponent in a lot of trouble. The rest, as they say, is history.
She starts unloading on this girl. Girl's taking a lot of punishment. She's not really fighting back, not able to defend herself, and the referee, he waves it off. It was entertaining while it lasted, which is saying a lot because I'm a boxing fan at heart. I'm not really into martial arts. I don't follow the sport. But because this was a former undisputed champion in boxing making their mixed martial arts debut, I thought enough of it that I should take it in. And it was fun to watch while it lasted. What don't you like about MMA? Well, the stand-up's all right when they're standing up and throwing punches and throwing kicks. But when they take it to the ground and they're there for half a minute or a minute trying to apply a hold, a submission, a joint lock, I just don't like those breaks in the action, and it feels like a cop-out. It interrupts the flow of the action for me, from an entertainment perspective. That's not saying that these are not effective strategies. Because they are. That's something you can resort to in a real combat situation, depending on other outlying factors, but from an entertainment perspective, it disrupts the flow of the action, at least for me. I would rather see the fighters stand and fight than roll around on the ground.
Savannah's got a nice ass.
Clarissa Shields was cage side, and we all know what this is. This is the PFL's effort to stage a rematch between them in the octagon instead of the boxing ring. Clarissa's had 3 MMA fights. I believe it's 3. She's up to 3 now. Savannah just had her first. She didn't look half bad out there, to be honest. You'd think this environment for a rematch between them favors Savannah a little bit more than it favors Clarissa. That crossed my mind. And what about them doing their second fight, their rematch, in an octagon instead of a boxing ring? Is that at all farcical? I'm intrigued. I don't mind it. I know that Savannah Marshall wanted to run it back with Clarissa immediately after their initial meeting, but Clarissa was insistent that their rematch take place in America and not in the UK like the first time. The problem with that is, who was going to pay for it? Who was going to pay Savannah to come to America when she stood to make more money staying in the UK? Clarissa as well. Don't forget who paid for their first fight. It wasn't Dimitri Salita. It was Ben Shalom. It was Boxer. It was Sky Sports. So when you turn around and say that you want the rematch to be in America, who's supposed to pay for it when your promoter didn't pay for the first one, all right? And if they do a rematch between Clarissa and Savannah in the octagon instead of the boxing ring, where is that going down? Because Savannah's fight this past weekend was across the pond. Wasn't here in America. Clarissa had to travel. If the event coordinators and the people at the PFL decide that this fight is better suited in front of a European audience than an American one, well, that would make things redundant now, wouldn't it? Yeah. The whole reason the rematch didn't happen in a boxing ring is because Clarissa wanted it in America. Well, if it ends up in an octagon and it's still not in America, then you might as well have had it in a boxing ring. In the UK? You can slice it and dice it however you want. That it's only right, that it's only fair. Clarissa won the first fight, so she calls dibs on where the second fight happens. But it actually boils down to economics, my friend. It's about the money. Who's putting up the money for the rematch, and where do they think the fight will generate the most money, the most revenue? That's what it all boils down to. Could be America, could be in the UK. That all depends on what the PFL thinks and what the PFL wants. So watching this, it reminded me of what an entertaining and skillful fighter Savannah Marshall is, and how I would like to see her come back to boxing, but there's nobody to come back to. There's nobody to fight. 160, 168. That's what I always tell you. 160, 168, 75, heavyweight. Those are barren divisions. There's barely anybody there to fight. And the biggest fight for Savannah still is Clarissa Shields. The same is true in reverse. The biggest fight in terms of profile and purse is still Savannah Marshall. She's about to have that fight with Vanessa Joanese for what is a WBC heavyweight title. It's not even a bad fight, to be honest, but Vanessa doesn't have Savannah's profile. Savannah is more well-known. As much as I would like to see Savannah return to the sport of boxing, the talent pool just ain't that deep at those weights. At 160 and 168, there's barely anybody there for her to fight. You know, it's not like that at the lower weights. Plenty of girls to fight at 147 or 140, 135, and below 135, just all down there. The talent pool's a lot deeper, so those girls don't have to resort to fighting in mixed martial arts
to find something to do, but north
of 154, it gets pretty dry up there.
It's an interesting proposition that Savannah and Clarissa might meet in the octagon instead of the boxing ring for their rematch. It's a twist.
I don't mind it.
Division's dry. You gotta do what you gotta do. This does keep things a little bit more interesting, so we'll see how long it takes them to put this rematch together.
Clarissa's got to get through Vanessa Joanese. I think she's going to. Then after that, maybe sometime in the fall or winter, they do the rematch.
We move over to the top-ranked card, the co-main event to the main event, Carrington versus Garcia, where Shushu Carrington showed his class with a win, as Naoya Inoue was ringside looking on. With the eyes of the great 4-division champion Naoya Inoue watching from ringside, Bruce Carrington displayed the depth of his boxing IQ Saturday night by recording an 8th-round TKO of replacement opponent Brian Garcia at the theater at Madison Square Garden in New York. "He came to watch me," said Carrington, who saw undisputed junior featherweight champion Inoue wave to him following the destructive performance by the 27-year-old Brooklyn featherweight contender, ranked number 4 by way of the WBO and number 7 by way of the WBC. There's plenty of speculation that Japan's Inoue will move to featherweight next year. Carrington, who turned pro in January of 2023, showed why his rise has been rapid with his finishing flurry, a barrage that prompted the referee to dart in and spare the no longer responsive Garcia of Panama from further damage. Brian came to fight, and his knockout ratio, 25 and 34 bouts, shows that he's dangerous. "But I have a lot of experience to get around that and break him down," Carrington said. He had a lot of will, more reason to break him down. Garcia, 30, was summoned to replace Enrique Vivas on the card after Vivas couldn't gain a visa clearance in time to make the bout. By destabilizing his opponent, Carrington landed a 5th-round knockdown from a flurry closed by a right hand to the head. Just before the sequence, Garcia began to bleed from the nose. The blood was the most vivid example of how Carrington was weakening Garcia. As the fighter's legs weakened and his punching activity decreased, Carrington was content to let Garcia be the early aggressor, and then in the 2nd round, he seemed to unearth an opening by letting fly more power punches, including 2 hard lefts to the head. Carrington then planted a head-jarring right hand in the 3rd and delivered a body shot, only to expose himself to a Garcia power shot that added intrigue to the bout. Because Garcia was so eager to throw punches, he exposed himself to blows like the hard right that Carrington sent him to punctuate in exchange. By the 7th, Garcia was backpedaling after being ordered by his trainer to hold more in order to preserve himself from sustained damage. It didn't help. Carrington nearly knocked Garcia through the ropes to end the 7th, landing a combination of 2 quick lefts and hammering a right to the head.
It's called educated pressure.
That's what you saw from Bruce Carrington in yesterday's co-main event. Educated pressure.
He was walking the guy down, baiting his lead, baiting him to throw so he can counter what he throws.
Being very effective while he does it, fighting out of a Philly shell. Most of these young fighters these days that use the Philly shell,
they only do it because Floyd used to do it.
Most of them are not very good with that guard, but Bruce Carrington is one of the few who really knows how to use it.
Whether he's parrying punches out of the guard or rolling punches off the shoulder, changing levels, bobbing, weaving,
coming forward while he does it, which makes it even more impressive, putting that kind of pressure on a guy,
systematically breaking him down.
That's what being a slick fighter looks like. That's what being slick is. It's not being way out there on the outside somewhere, going for a jog, a tour of the turnbuckles, so far on the outside you're hardly in a fight. There ain't nothing slick about that.
All those outside cutie pies.
It's mid-range to inside where you can prove that you're a slick fighter, slipping, bobbing, weaving.
Shushu was very slippery yesterday, lethal in the pocket.
Fast, strong, defensible.
He's one of my favorite unbeaten up-and-comers.
So, 4-division champion Naoya Inoue was ringside, taking in the action, and Bruce acknowledged him after the fight.
Is Bruce ready for him?
So in my previous video, we talked about Bruce Carrington's expressed desire to face Naoya Inoue down the line. Not right away, because Inoue's not on the eve of moving up to featherweight right away.
That could be a year from now.
Shushu's expressed desire to face Naoya Inoue at some point in the not-so-distant future. It didn't bother me, because when you're in Naoya Inoue's position, that's what's going to happen. That's what people are going to do. When you're at the top of the mountain and you're making money and you're
making history, people are talking about you.
Your contemporaries are going to call you out. The guys at or around where you campaign. It's an occupational hazard, and that's the way it is.
It didn't bother me.
And you don't want to become one of these super fans. You don't want to be one of those guys that gets in a habit of becoming overly defensive of a fighter that you like. If you're an Inoue fan, you have to understand
People are going to want to fight him.
Bruce wants to fight him.
And a growing number of featherweight champions want to fight him. They're waiting for him to move up because they know what he's worth, and let's be honest, they want that advantage, that they're naturally bigger and acclimated to this weight.
They're bigger than he is, and they're acclimated to this weight.
But here is where I take issue. Here, where there are 4 separate champions holding 4 separate versions of a world title at featherweight, not including Bruce Carrington, and they're not fighting each other. They're not unifying with each other. See, I understand the desire from any one of those fighters at 126 to face Inoue. I understand Bruce's desire as well, but you can't worry about a super bantamweight before you worry about the guys at your own weight. You guys need to unify.
Bruce needs to win a title.
I'm okay with him entertaining the idea that one day he may face Inoue, but what I haven't seen from Bruce is a call-out to the other champions at this weight. No, I haven't seen him call out Nick Paul. I haven't seen him call out Ray Vargas or Luis Lopez or Rafael Espinoza. I haven't seen it.
I want to.
Don't put the cart before the horse. Fighting Inoue doesn't come before fighting one of them.
It shouldn't.
I don't want to see another situation like what we saw at 168 with all the champions that were up there before Canelo did all the legwork, not fighting each other because they're all waiting for him. No, I don't want to see that at 126 because he knew he's not even there yet, and he's not going to be for a year, maybe over a year.
Bruce is talking about fighting him now.
He's talking about that fight right now, but I don't hear him talking about a Luis Lopez fight or a Ray Vargas fight, a Nick Paul fight, a Rafael Espinoza fight, and I feel like, that's where your focus should be. That's what you should be targeting, a world title, because if and when Inoue moves up there, that's what he's going to go after.
The titles, just like he did at 122.
You want to fight him when he gets to 126, you need to have a title, in which case, you need to be targeting one of them and talking about them, calling out them.
I ain't seen that.
2 of those 4 champions are right there at top rank. Technically 3, since Nick Paul's in bed with Frank, and Frank is good buddies with Bob.
You got access to him when the time comes.
Luis Lopez, Rafael Espinoza, or Nick Paul. And if any one of those 3 guys don't want to give you the time of day, that's what becoming a mandatory is for, so that you can get your hands on a title before it becomes about Inoue. That's what it's about.
That's all I'm saying. Don't put the cart before the horse.
We then come to the main event of that same card. Unbeaten Xander Zayas versus former WBO champion of Brazil, Patrick Teixeira. A hard-nosed veteran who's a stubborn customer and tough as old boots because he got hit a lot. And I mean a lot in this fight. That Xander Zayas was walking him down and putting the pressure on him, it says it all, really, because more often than not, it's Patrick Teixeira coming forward and throwing punches and bunches. So Xander was at least strong enough to put Patrick on his back foot and force him to retreat, force him to move and punch, try to box, even though that's not his forte.
And that's why that didn't work for him.
Because that's not who he is as a fighter. That's not his identity. That's not what he does at his best. He's a pressure fighter. He's a volume puncher. This is not dissimilar from what we saw Ellie Scottney and Dina Thorsland do to Mary Romero. At her best, Mary's a pressure fighter.
But with them, she tried to box.
Move and punch. And it didn't work for Mary any more than it worked for Patrick yesterday with Xander Zayas. When you put the pressure fighter on their back foot, when you force them to retreat, that already means trouble for the pressure fighter because that's not what they'd rather be doing, and that's not what they're good at.
Then why are they doing it?
It's because they're not being allowed to come forward. They're not being allowed to step into their punches and bring other punches over the way they're used to. That's the effect that a boxer-puncher has on a pressure fighter, a boxer-puncher like Xander Zayas. So I know that he put the pressure on Patrick yesterday, but he's not actually a pressure fighter.
It's easy to get confused by this.
Sometimes boxer-punchers can go out there and look like pressure guys because they're the ones coming forward.
It's the counter-punching.
The giveaway is the counter-punching. The reason Patrick isn't able to come forward and do what he normally does is because he's being countered every time he tries. Countered to the head, countered to the body.
Xander Zayas landed a lot of body shots. They had a noticeable effect on Patrick.
That's why he was boxing instead of punching. That's why he was retreating. For those who haven't seen Patrick in action over the years, they may not appreciate that or understand that.
They're not going to notice that Patrick is backpedaling most of the fight.
But why that's important? Xander's forcing him to by drawing his lead, then countering.
He's looking to elicit a response from Patrick that he can then intercept.
Personally, I think it was a good showing for Xander Zayas. Beneficial, being forced to work for the duration of time that he was working, that it didn't end in an early knockout, and it didn't end right away. It's good for Xander. Those are valuable rounds. That is valuable experience.
You don't think it's an indictment against Xander and his power that he didn't stop Patrick?
No, because Patrick's not a guy you just go in there and stop. Patrick Teixeira has only ever been knocked out once, and that was close to 10 years ago in 2016 at the hands of Curtis Stevens. Since then, he's been in there with the likes of Brian Castaño and Carlos Adames, in more recent years, Magomed Kurbanov, and they didn't stop him, and they were further along in their careers than Xander is now. They didn't knock out Patrick, so I don't think it's the end of the world that Xander didn't knock out Patrick.
I don't think Xander, at 21 years old, is as strong now as he's going to be later on. You often hear about a fighter growing into his man strength. That usually comes in at around, let's say, 25, 26, when the fighter is more maturated.
And when the fighter is allowed to fill out a little more. Remember, Xander's at 154 now. Look at his frame. This guy could easily grow into 160, grow into 168. He's a decent-sized puncher now, perhaps not the biggest, but I don't expect him to be at 21 years old.
What I notice?
That most other people don't, because most other people are just in a rush to get out their knee-jerk reactions, is that Patrick Teixeira broke character. He had to survive. He had to be able to go the distance with Xander Zayas. He had to break character and move around, because if he tried to come forward, he was going to get himself knocked out. Those body shots were hurting Patrick Teixeira.
I think for the last 2 or 3 rounds of the fight, Patrick was in survival mode. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was just trying not to get knocked out.
This was all but a clean sweep for Xander Zayas. I only saw arguably one round that you could have arguably given Patrick Teixeira, but Xander was in control throughout for the vast majority of the fight. My only complaint with yesterday's card is that it ran too long, that these top-ranked shows, if you're on the East Coast, they run into the wee hours of the morning, and something needs to be done about that.
They were trying to accommodate that UFC card that was on at the same time.
Which I don't think is necessary, because in doing so, that implies that the UFC and the boxing match are sharing an audience when they're not. The people that want to watch boxing are going to watch boxing. The people that want to watch UFC are going to watch UFC. They're not cannibalizing each other's audience. They have separate demographics, different audiences.
So you don't stall the main event in the boxing match to accommodate the MMA fans, because they're not watching the boxing match and they're not going to.
They've got to stop that.